Hello everyone at the Sari Colloquium, Paris. A warm greetings to all of you and my infinite gratitude to Professor Geeta Ganapati Dure for giving me the opportunity to make this virtual presentation. Dreams as manifestations of the subconscious often figure in art forms. There are sometimes recurring patterns which pave way for understanding how the artist's mind works as it taps the primary imagination and the processes of the secondary imagination. Sigmund Freud's theory of dreams, we all know, has influenced surrealistic painters in the 20th century. Automatism, as the psychologists would call it, plays a significant role to associate the subconscious in painting and other forms of art as conduits for unspoken feelings and desires. Such art forms are a result of free associations or spontaneous associations resulting in abstract and figurative art. However, the painters I wish to explore in my presentation are not really surrealistic painters, though the art forms in Europe might have influenced the styles of paintings in India in 19th and 20th century. The topic for my presentation is of dreams of Indian feminine and the aesthetic sublime. Before I start on my analysis of paintings of the Indian feminine by some Indian painters influenced by European art forms in the 19th and 20th century and some contemporary painters now, let's go back to the idea of art itself. Any art form, once complete, invites two kinds of gazers. The first one is the artist himself, who before paring his nails off the subject, goes through the processes of self-assessment and the conflict and confrontation, for in many cases, between the idea and reality, between the motion and the act, falls the shadow. And maybe not. Sometimes the artist himself is surprised by his own art, by the transformation of his libido to the superconscious level of sublimation, leading to peace and harmony with the self, and yes, a purgation of all passions spent. Or a feeling of Burkean sublimity, or in the more recent times, as Jadranka's Kovind Kapov would say, the origin of surprise is the break, the pause, the rupture between one's sensibility and one's powers of representation, leading to sublimity and the subsequent feelings of admiration and or responsibility, allowing for intertwining of aesthetics and ethics. The second kind of voyeuristic gaze is that of the gazer across time and space. So when we attempt to understand any art form, we grapple with the aesthetic principles of those times, and maybe not. If the response is spontaneous, we try to know the context. We are curious to know the context. Talking about Indian art, it's very different from the Western aesthetics, and it has to be understood differently. The most significant feature of Indian cave paintings has been a vision of life and worldview from an inner vision which harmonizes man with his surroundings. Portraiture was possibly the earliest and most popular form of painting, and there's an oral myth associated with this. One Princess Usha had a dream of a beautiful youth which she confided in one of her maids of honor named Chitralekha. The name itself suggests one who has a natural gift for portraits. Chitralekha, in order to help the mistress in identifying the youth, paints the portraits of all the deities she knew. Usha identifies through her paintings the youth Anuruddha, the grandson of Krishna. The significance of this myth of portraiture is that most often such paintings owe their origin either to memory or dreams or visions. The basic principles of sublimity in Indian art forms, specifically ancient and medieval art, whether feminine forms or no, are based on 6 principles. Rupa Bheda, the knowledge of appearances; Pramanam, correct perception, measure, and structure; Bhavya, action of feelings or forms; Lavina or Josanam, infusion of grace, artistic representation; Sadrishyam, similitude; Varnikabhanga, use of brush and colors in a certain style. The Buddhist frescoes at Ajanta and Ellora are primarily based on these principles. To take an Occident's point of view, these paintings are impressive and have stately attitudes. The contours of these figures are superb and reveal a keen perception of the beauty of form. There is no undue striving after academic or anatomical exactitude. The drawing is spontaneous and unrestrained. Each figure naturally falls into its correct place and unaffectedly takes its right position in the general composition. In sentiment, the art is intensely emotional and expressive. This is Percy Brown. Coomarsawamy has a different take on Indian paintings. According to him, through all Indian schools of thought, there runs like a golden thread the fundamental idealism of the Upanishads, the Vedanta. There's a unity that underlies all its bewildering variety. He writes about the infinite superiority of intuition, the direct perception over the intellect. This is surely how we can interpret the aesthetics of ancient and medieval Indian art. The paintings in Ajanta, the Queen's stepwell, Rani ki Bhav, in 11th century, constructed during the Chalukyas, as in the memory of Bhimadev Solanki by his widowed queen Udayamati. It is in Maru Gurjara architectural style, an inverted temple with 7 levels of stairs. The central theme is Dashavatar, or 10 incarnations of Vishnu, including Buddha. The avatars are accompanied by sadhus, brahmins, and apsaras. At the water level is Vishnu reclining on Sheshnaga, or the eternal serpent, signifying the end of time. Stepwells were sites for spiritual bliss and socializing. This is a sculpture of Apsara or Alushakanya biting a betel leaf and a dwarf tickling her foot. Next is a woman mendicant and also Nagakanya, a woman who is meditating, and you have a woman playing with a snake. On the left hand side you have Karpamanjari, and on the right hand side Nayika. Karpa is camphor. She is adorning herself or using camphor on her body, and Nayika, the dancer, who is putting on an anklet. This is the frieze depicting the river goddesses, the spirits manifested in the rivers like Saraswati, Godavari, and so on and so forth. Ellora Caves. There are 100 such caves with a combination of Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain monuments. And you have the sacred feminine as a worshipper or as a deity. The sacred and the everyday mingle in the worldview. These Nayikas or Kanyas or Apsaras, as they may be called, were part of the feminist sublime in the consciousness of the artist in ancient Indian imagination. The association of the Nayikas with surrounding nature or as deities of nature speaks of a worldview which identified humans with their surroundings in their oneness with the divine. Next we come to Khajuraho and the erotic sublime, 12th century. Khajuraho architecture is replete with erotic carvings. The idea is to suggest that one has to be surfeited with the pleasures of the world in order to enter the emptiness or the sunyata. One cannot possibly repress one's desires and at the same time be a devotee of God. We now move over to the miniature paintings and scrolls of the Mughals, Rajasthani, Tanjore, Mysore, Pahari, and Madhubani. On the left-hand side, you have the Rajasthani paintings of the feminine, beauty, women and her domestic world. You have a maiden painting, her beloved, and you have a maiden with a bird. And on the right-hand side, you have the Mughal painting, the Mughal miniature painting of a maiden, maybe the queen. Mughal school of painting and miniatures coincide with the Mughal period. Worth mentioning are the paintings supervised by Mir Said Ali of the Amir Hamza, the romance of the Amir Hamza or Dastani Amir Hamza in Humayun's reign, which continued into the reign of Akbar and later into the Mughal period. The influence of the Mughal style is felt in the Rajasthani and Pahari paintings in the 16th century, the themes of which are mainly drawn from Mahabharata and Ramayana and popular myths. Scrolls of Tanjore, Mysore, Pahari schools of art are interlaced with myths, popular folk tales, and worldview, where the dream of the feminine is embedded in the way of life itself. The idealized woman in Rajasthani paintings, known as Bani Thami, were common as the dream of the ideal feminine. Bani Thami, as such, is the concept of ideal feminine with stylized feature of beauty, originating from Kishangarh, a small town in Rajasthan. Most of these paintings are from the male gaze, reflecting male desire. The colonial influence on Indian art begins with Raja Ravi Verma, the Madras School of Art and Craft in 1850, established by Alexander Hunter, and the school in Calcutta in 1854, namely the first Industrial Art Society by Jyotindra Mohan Tagore, Rajendra Lal Mishra, which is now the Government School of Art, and later another in Bombay in 1867 and in Lahore in 1875, projected an endeavor by the colonial British masters to give the Indians a taste of European art, to inculcate by training Indians in Western representational and techniques. One of the dominating intention of the British art institutions was to see that the Indian artists could paint Indian mythology and life with the power of European art. Raja Ravi Verma attempts to re-establish Indian art through Western methods, principles, and traits. He takes Indian art back to feudal themes, and he resurrects classical Indian sources from the Mahabharata and from Kalidasa by using European techniques of realism in color, composition, and perspective. He is, as Taupati Guha points out, fits ideally the colonial prescriptions for a new, improved Indian art. He subscribes to Lord Napier, the government of Madras's famous speech in 1871. I quote, "The new Indian artists trained in European style of painting to enrich their superior skills with the true stuffing of India, that is Indian people and costumes, Indian landscape, and age-old epic stories of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata," close quotes. Ravi Verma was not only considered a legend in his own time, but he was responsible in giving new dimensions to Indian paintings and influencing the future artists. We move on to the Bengal School of Art. Here you have Shakuntala by Raja Ravi Verma and Shakuntala as in the Bengal School of Art. Notice the difference in the painting style. The first national art movement of the Bengal Renaissance in early 20th century saw its exponents like Abanindranath Tagore, Nandalal Bose, Shonaini Devi, Monishi De, Mukul De, Kalipada Ghoshal, Gangendranath Tagore, and others. Their attempt was to revive old patterns of art and style and reconstruct a pan-Asianistic model of art. According to Abanindranath Tagore, European art was materialistic in character and India needed to return to its own traditions. So the influence of Yokoyama Taikan and the other Japanese painters, along with Chinese and Japanese calligraphic tradition, merged with Indian spiritual aesthetics in the Bengal School of Art. These two paintings, Bharat Mata is by Abanindranath Tagore and Saraswati by Nandalal Bose. There are similarities and differences, and yet you could well understand and follow how these paintings are very different from Raja Ravi Verma's style. Now we move over to Amrita Sher-Gil. I have to jump across time as it's not possible to keep the continuity within such a short span that is given in a presentation. Amrita Sher-Gil is born of a Sikh father and a Hungarian mother and spent most of her early life in Budapest, and then she moved to Shimla in India, and once again she goes back to Italy to study art in Florence. She returns to India later to go back to Europe again, namely Paris, to train as a painter. Her primary inspiration among European painters were the Nagakanya school of painting or the Hungarian school of painting. She begins to be haunted by a longing to return to India in 1934, and this finds expression in her paintings of self-search or self-portraits, namely the Tahiti. Here you have the painting called The Three Girls, and the next one also depicting the secular imagination of the women in her thought. We move over to self-portraits. Left hand side you have her own portrait, the face, and this is the Tahitian. Sher-Gil, among the Indian traditions, was influenced by the Mughal and Pahari paintings, along with the ancient paintings of Ajanta, and she was also influenced by the Bengal art movement. She left behind a legacy for generations of Indian artists to follow. Once again, I'll have to skip across time. I come to a very contemporary painter, Amruta Patil. She hails from Goa, was trained in the School of Fine Arts in Boston, and she lives in Paris. She's a graphic novelist actually, who weaves the Indian myths as a Sutradhar to bring the stories closer to the present. Sutradhar is the narrator. Her intention is to offer Rasha replete on the aesthetic traditions of India. Her graphic novels are an exploration of narrative using visuals with text. She first works on the texts which she uses in her graphic novel, and then she goes into the visuals which come later. The text, as she had confided to me once, actually involve active research and rethinking. The painting on the left-hand side, which says, "May we never be held hostage by old narratives." This is what explains the Sutradhar. The Sutra means the thread, how she is continuing with the thread of Indian imagination as she is exploring the age-old myths through her graphic novels. And on the right-hand side, this painting is called Feelings. To conclude briefly, this presentation is just the tip of an iceberg. It only attempts to trace the lineage in Indian aesthetic imagination with regard to the dreams of the feminine sublime. If the ancient and medieval Indian art mingled with the spiritual and the secular worldview, the miniature paintings, the scrolls in different schools of Indian art are both, as in the Thankas and Nakashi scrolls, which I couldn't discuss. With the European influence and Raja Ravi Verma, the aesthetic imagination takes a new turn through new techniques of presentation. The Bengal art movement lends a pan-Asian dimension to art, though the painters of the school were influenced by modernist schools of painting. The Indian feminine from the Alashakonnas and spiritual deities in the ancient aesthetic thought would also be the erotic feminine as in Khajuraho carvings. The feminine aesthetics could be the primitive instinct as in Tahitian by Amrita Sher-Gil. It could be a psychological probe into one's own desire for self-reflection. It could also be a touch of realism in secular Indian imagination. The feminine storyteller or the Sutradhar in the graphic novelist Amruta could attempt to keep alive the oral tradition through interlinked visuals with texts to bring home the age-old Indian myths in contemporary life and imagination. Thank you so much.